Destiny's raid bosses are some of the toughest and most complex video game bosses ever created, and today we're going to take a look at what I consider the 7 greatest Destiny raid bosses in the franchise's history. Now if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like on it and subscribe for similar videos to this one. But let's just hop right in, starting with the Templar from the Vault of Glass. Now the first raid boss Destiny players ever faced was the Templar, and needless to say, this fight left a very good first impression of the Destiny raiding experience. The Templar's arena is where a majority of the Vault of Glass raid takes place, including 3 separate encounters in this room alone: the Confluxes, the Oracles, and of course the Templar fight itself. Because of that, you definitely spend a lot of time getting familiar with one of the most well-designed raid arenas. Like I mentioned earlier, this encounter was the first of its kind, and it definitely did not hold back on the difficulty. After blowing through the game's easy story missions and strikes, no Destiny player was even remotely prepared for something like the Templar fight. Once players were finally familiar with the mechanics of the fight, it didn't become much easier though, because players now would need to juggle those mechanics all while staying alive and also while damaging the boss. Keeping up with the randomness of the Oracles, preventing the Templar's teleports, and desperately trying to survive the onslaught of Hobgoblin sniper shots, all while dealing as much damage as possible? It felt impossible to a newbie like me when I first attempted the raid, and it still remains a challenging fight to this day. Not only a memorable boss, but it still stands the test of time as one of the best fights in the franchise's history. The first of many bosses we'd faced in Kingsfall, and continue to be my favorite boss in that raid, is the Warpriest. The Warpriest was unlike any boss we'd faced in previous raids, and its excellent design has been the foundation for many future boss fights. Vosik from Wrath, Callus from Leviathan, Kali from Last Wish, and even Aksis have a very similar mechanic that stems from the way the Warpriest fight handled doing damage phases. It did so by requiring players to stand behind pillars to survive a wipe mechanic, in turn destroying that pillar, therefore letting you know you've just used up one of 4 damage phases. This was then reimagined as clean rooms in Vosik, sneaky little doors you hid inside for the Kali fight, and pillars of light in the Aksis fight, all to survive a wipe mechanic. Bungie really seemed to like this mechanic, and it was starting to feel a bit overused, but I'm glad they're branching out a bit in how they design their bosses. But at the time, the plate mechanic, being brand new, was initially very confusing to the masses, and players thought they had to read Hive language or something to understand how the rune pillars worked. But eventually we wised up and noticed they just glowed to indicate which pillar to stand on, making the fight, of course, much easier. I really loved how the fight made you split up into 3 teams of 2 and made players take hold of their area and slaughter adds as quick as possible. The brand mechanic was also extremely unique and was very stressful if you were the wielder, because at any moment an enemy you were aiming at could dip behind cover and cause you to die, so you really had to be on your toes if you were unlucky enough to be the brand holder. This fight also made you bunch up for damage phases, really giving a sense of true teamwork and coming together to just unload as much damage as possible on the guy, and it still continues to be one of my favorite fights in the game. It's extremely replayable, and it just never gets old. Insurrection Prime is an extremely well-designed fight mechanically, and it only falls short in a few categories. Number 1 being the boss design, which just wasn't for me. I felt it was just a little bit bland, essentially just being a massive mech, and it didn't compare to something like Oryx or Riven in terms of its art design. And the second thing being those extremely annoying berserkers that for whatever reason seem to have the wonkiest hitboxes on top of their excessive teleporting. Other than that one frustration, I found this fight to be one of the most cleverly designed boss fights in Destiny. The fighting space is definitely the largest final boss arena, containing a bunch of buildings and surface area so big that you can even summon your Sparrow and drive fucking tanks. It's huge and it's great. The map reader role is one of the coolest Bungie has ever made. Having one player have eyes on the entire arena, directing everyone on where to find specific enemies and deploy relics, was genius, and it made for some awesome teamwork and communication. All the while, players would need to destroy a shield surrounding the boss before the eventual damage phase. Once the shield was off, someone would need to hop into a tank and blast the son of a bitch. Now this is where my favorite mechanic comes into play, during the damage phase. Once the damage phase begins, players are given a buff called Phase Radiance that switches every 10 seconds or so. Players need to stack the correct radiances by standing next to someone with their same type as them to benefit from a 3 times damage multiplier. This mechanic really called for players to pay attention at all times to benefit the very most, as well as stay alive, as overlapping incorrect radiances would slowly kill the players. I really just love this mechanic. I think it's extremely unique and it's the best one Bungie has ever created, and I hope we see more similar ones in the future. The Gahlran fight from the Crown of Sorrow raid is a perfect example of chaos that can be tamed by skilled players. If you really dissect everything that needs to happen in this fight, it can actually seem very overwhelming, but once you really learn the mechanics and understand them, this fight becomes one of the simplest fights in Destiny that just flows and players can just put on autopilot and enjoy running it. This fight splits players into 3 groups of 2, leaving these small teams to manage their own space of chaos. As a team of 2, you'll need to manage swapping your Witch's Blessing buff regularly, destroying crystals, clearing ads, and forcing your Gahlran to destroy his own deceptions. There's really a lot happening at once and it requires a lot of coordination, but like I said, it flows like clockwork once you have it down. Gahlran appears in each of the 3 areas, 2 of which are just mirages. It's unknown till the last minute which platform you'll have to fight the real Gahlran. Doing DPS to Gahlran isn't anything too unique, however I really just love how this fight flows and how skilled players are really able to just tame its chaotic nature. It's very fun and very replayable, one of the best fights in Destiny 2 for sure. Riven of 1,000 Voices, if done legitimately, is mechanically the toughest boss fight ever designed in Destiny's history. You literally need a fucking notepad filled with information you gather throughout the fight to reference to later during the fight. L1R4.
Write that down, write that down!
Just before you meet Riven face to face, you have no idea what to expect this wish dragon to look like, but then she reveals herself as this disgusting, hideous monstrosity. Riven's design is definitely unique as hell and was nothing like I pictured based on our previous knowledge of the Ahamkara in the lore. The quickest rundown possible of this fight goes something like this. Riven splits your team up, this time into 2 groups of 3. Riven will appear to one of the 2 teams where she will need to be staggered by one of the teams. In doing so, she will reveal 2 of her eyes that will need to be called out to the other team and written down to be referenced later. Meanwhile, the other team will also be completing their own unique challenges. Similar to the map reading from the Scourge of the Past raid, one player will need to stand behind a giant window that reveals secret icon locations that players will need to activate. Players will need to complete this cycle 3 times for 3 sets of eyes before coming to the DPS phase. While doing damage to Riven, players will need to write down Riven's various eye callouts either in their notepad or in-game text chat if on PC. After completing that ridiculous task and doing some DPS, you'll then be able to drop down and shoot blisters alongside Riven's body, and then the whole cycle repeats until you defeat her. It is a massive amount of work to nail this fight, and it really shows that the raid team at Bungie that designed this encounter are some of the most talented and creative individuals out there. More so than ever, good communication could not be more important or emphasized than in the Riven fight. There's just so many things going on and things that could go wrong, it's almost impossible something so complex as this fight can even exist. Massive props to the Bungie devs behind this encounter. It's one of a kind. Atheon was the final boss to the Vault of Glass raid, and I'm sure more people are familiar with this fight than any other in Destiny. Beating Atheon was the greatest accomplishment one could dream of during vanilla Destiny. Early on, Atheon was a very challenging fight with a lot of moving parts, and not everyone had the skill or the light level to get it done, so having that Vault of Glass clear under your belt was really something special. One of my favorite things about this fight is the Atheon boss room. Without a doubt, it's the prettiest final boss arena in any raid. I mean, the entire Vault of Glass's aesthetic is just incredible. The mechanics in this fight aren't anything too complex when compared to something like the Riven fight, but at the time they were pretty demanding and they still hold up as a solid challenge of your coordination skills. Between the random teleportation into alternate dimensions and a really intense DPS check, the fight was a great blend between chaos and just pure enjoyment. I'm always down to run a Vault of Glass raid, even to this day, just to get to fight this guy. Atheon still remains as one of the most fun bosses to ever take down. And finally, at number 1 is Aksis. I consider this fight to be a perfect raid encounter, especially if doing the challenge mode on hard difficulty. The Aksis fight is the most addictive boss fight in any video game, and once you beat him, you just want to keep running it again and again. The Aksis challenge mode on hard requires a ton of communication and perfect execution of the mechanics, but does so without feeling tedious or unfair. The empowered mechanic is so simple but works so well in this fight because of the randomness and chaos it causes. Your team does a lot of moving around in this fight, but it's always extremely exciting and fun as hell to run. Something else they nailed was the Aksis character design. It's so fucking cool. A mutated fallen-like thing has robotic spider legs? It's a pretty far out concept that I think turned out so badass. There's not much more I can say about Aksis other than it's the most fun yet challenging fight Destiny has ever seen, and it still has yet to be topped to this day. But that's going to be it for my personal favorite raid bosses in Destiny. Let me know what your favorite Destiny raid bosses are in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like on it, it would be very much appreciated, and subscribe for more videos just like this. Thanks again for watching, everybody. I'll see you all in my next video.